They were the legends we thought could do no wrong, the faces on trading cards, the heroes whose stats we could recite by heart and tell one choice, one pitch, one secret, turned them from icons into outcasts, their names now etched not just in the record books, but in the sports rule book as warnings. These are the stories baseball tries to forget, the scandals that shook its foundation, from World Series fixes to billion-dollar betrayals, from chemical advantages to silent conspiracies, and the lesson running through them all is as sharp as a fresh-cut diamond. In a game built on trust, the moment you break it, you're not just playing for wins, you're playing for your legacy, and that's a game you can lose forever. Baseball has always sold itself as more than a game. It's a bond between generations, a tradition that outlives the players, a slow but certain heartbeat that runs through summers year after year. But sometimes, the very people entrusted to protect that heartbeat are the ones who stop it cold. And when that happens, it's not just records and standings that vanish. It's trust, and trust in baseball, once broken, takes decades to rebuild. In August 1994, the sport's heartbeat flatlined, not from war, not from a natural disaster, but from a decision made in boardrooms and union halls, a standoff so bitter that it canceled a World Series for the first time in 90 years. The 1994 player strike didn't just wipe out games, it wiped out dreams, careers, and in some cases, entire team legacies. This wasn't a minor labor dispute. This was a collision between two forces convinced they were fighting for the future. Owners who insisted the game couldn't survive without reining in salaries through a cap, and players who saw the cap as an attack on decades of progress in free agency and fair pay. The collective bargaining agreement had expired in December 1993, and as negotiations stumbled through 1994, things got ugly. Owners withholding $7.8 million in player salaries, players calling it theft, owners calling it a necessary correction, and by August 12th, the MLB Players Association had enough. They walked off, bringing the season to a dead stop. The numbers were staggering: 948 games lost, including the entire postseason and the World Series, and the financial wounds were deep, with owners losing an estimated $580 million in revenue, and players missing out on $230 million in salaries. But the true cost wasn't in money, it was in what might have been. Take the 1990 from Montreal Expos, a small market team that had assembled a juggernaut, 70-40, the best record in baseball, loaded with talent like Pedro Martinez, Moises Alou, Larry Walker, the kind of roster that comes along maybe once in a franchise's lifetime. They were favored by many to win it all, but instead of a parade, they got a permanent what if. And then there was Tony Gwynn, the purest hitter of his generation, batting .394 in mid-August, within striking distance of becoming the first player since Ted Williams in 1941 to hit .400. Gwynn would win more batting titles, but he'd never get that close again. Congress tried to mediate. President Bill Clinton himself urged both sides to reach a deal, but nothing stuck until a federal court injunction forced the season to resume in April 1995, and by then, something fundamental had shifted. Fans felt betrayed. Attendance dropped 20%, and even when home runs started flying in the late 90s, some part of the public never fully forgave either side. What's so striking about the 94 strike is that it wasn't sparked by scandal or cheating, it was sparked by greed, or at least the perception of greed, and in the eyes of millions, that was just as bad, because it proved that the people in charge would burn down the season rather than bend. And the smoke from that fire still lingers in the way fans view baseball's labor battles today. If baseball had saints and sinners carved into its mythology, the Black Sox scandal would be the original fall from grace, the moment when the sport's innocence, or at least its illusion, was ripped away. It was 1919. The Chicago White Sox were the class of the American League, winners of the 1917 World Series, loaded with stars like Shoeless Joe Jackson, Eddie Chicot, and Buck Weaver. They were heavy favorites to beat the Cincinnati Reds, but behind the scenes, resentment was brewing. Players felt underpaid by owner Charles Comiskey, a man famous for his stinginess, so stingy, in fact, He once allegedly made his players pay to launder their own uniforms in that climate of mistrust. First baseman Chick Gandil became the ringleader, striking a deal with gamblers for $80. An enormous sum at the time to throw the series. The fix was simple in concept, brutal in execution. Pitchers would miss spots. Hitters would take bad swings. Fielders would be a step too slow. The Reds would win. The gamblers would cash in, and the players would split the money. The Reds did win 5-3 in the best-of-9 series. But the whisper started immediately. How could a team this talented lose like that? The statistics smelled wrong. Chicot, who had gone 29-7 with a 1.8 ERA in the regular season, suddenly pitched like a man distracted. Lefty Williams lost all 3 of his starts. Shortstop Swede Risberg went 2 for 25 at the plate. And yet, Jackson, the star everyone assumed must be at the center of it, hit .375 with no errors. Still, in 1920, the scheme unraveled. Confessions were made, and a trial was held. The jury found all 8 accused players not guilty, but the damage was irreversible. Baseball's first commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, was brought in with one mandate: save the sport's credibility, and he acted swiftly, banning all. 8 for life: Gandil, Chicot, Jackson, Weaver, Risberg, Williams, Fred McMullen, and Happy Felsch. Jackson's case remains the most divisive. His numbers from the series are almost too good for someone supposedly throwing games, and supporters argue he was guilty of silence, not sabotage. Weaver's defense was similar. He attended a meeting about the fix, but claimed he refused to take part. To this day, historians debate whether Landis's punishment was justice or theater, designed less to mask the crime and more to send a message so loud no one would ever dare again. The irony is that the fix didn't just cheat the fans, it cheated the players too. Many never received their promised payout, and their careers ended not with disgrace in the box score, but with their names forever footnotes to a betrayal. The Black Sox scandal didn't just change baseball. It defined its paranoia about gambling for over a century, shaping every hardline policy since, from Pete Rose to modern lifetime bans. Because if 1919 proved anything, it's that one series, one team, one decision to put money above competition can burn down an entire era of trust. If the 1994 strike cracked baseball's bond with its fans, the late 1990s stitched it back together with something intoxicating: a rush of power, speed, and record-breaking spectacle that made every night at the ballpark feel like history was being written in real time. The home run was king, and its court was ruled by men who looked like they'd been sculpted from steel and adrenaline. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, names that could fill stadiums and sell out entire road trips just on rumor. They might hit one into the upper deck, and in 1998, McGwire and Sosa gave America a summer-long epic. 2 sluggers locked in a neck-and-neck chase to shatter Roger Maris's single-season home run record of 61. Every at-bat was an event. Every swing a moment you didn't dare look away from. McGwire broke it first, finishing with 70. Sosa not far behind with 66. Fans came flooding back to the game. Television ratings soared, and for a while, it felt like the heartache of '94 was gone. But beneath the fireworks, something was rotting. Barry Bonds, already a superstar, took it further into 2001, smashing 73 home runs, a number so far beyond his career norms that it was hard to believe. It was just the product of hard work and refined mechanics. Whispers became questions, questions became accusations, and soon, accusations became federal investigations. By the mid-2000s, the Balco scandal exploded, tying Bonds, Jason Jambi, and others to a shadowy nutrition lab allegedly supplying steroids and human growth hormone. The fantasy of a clean record book crumbled when the 2007 Mitchell report dropped. A 409-page public airing of baseball's chemical laundry. 89 players named, including all-stars and champions Andy Pettitte, Miguel Tejada, Roger Clemens, and more. The fallout was brutal. Hall of Fame ballots turned into battlegrounds. McGwire, Sosa, and Bonds became cautionary symbols. Their statistics, both immortal and untouchable. The irony is that for many fans, The so-called steroid era is still remembered with a kind of guilty fondness, not because they condone cheating, but because it brought back the drama and joy the strike had stolen. But that's the dark paradox of it. MLB had been slow to regulate, slow to test, and for years, the league quietly reaped the benefits of swollen crowds and soaring ratings, only to later stand as moral arbiter when the truth was undeniable. The steroid era forces an uncomfortable question. Is a game more valuable when it's pure but boring, or thrilling even if tainted? The league has made its choice in policy, rigorous testing, harsh suspensions, and public shaming, but the fans have their own complicated answer, one that sometimes sounds suspiciously like nostalgia. Baseball has always been a game of wits as much as power, a chess match where decoding an opponent's signs can be as valuable as hitting a 450-foot home run, and sign stealing, at least in its traditional, on-the-field form, has always been part of that cat-and-mouse game. But in 2017, the Houston Astros crossed the line from gamesmanship to calculated, technology-assisted fraud, and in doing so, they didn't just win a World Series, they set off one of the most contentious debates in modern baseball history about what cheating really means. Here's how it worked. A camera, stationed in center field at Minute Maid Park, trained directly on the opposing catcher's signs, live feed piped into a monitor near the Astros dugout, players and staff decoding the signs in real time, then relaying the pitch type to the batter by banging on a trash can. One bang for an off-speed pitch, no bang for a fastball, simple enough to execute, almost impossible to detect from the stands, and devastating in its effectiveness. Mike Fears, a pitcher from that 2017 team, broke the story publicly in 2019, confirming what opposing teams had quietly suspected for years. Journalist Ken Rosenthal's reporting laid out the details, and MLB's investigation left no doubt. The Astros had used the system in both 2017 and 2018, including during their championship run. The fallout was complicated. MLB fined the organization $5 million, the maximum allowed, stripped them of first and second-round draft picks in 2020 and 2021, and suspended GM Jeff Luhnow and manager A.J. Hinch for 1 year. Both were fired shortly after, but no players were individually punished, MLB citing its immunity agreements in exchange for testimony. That decision only deepened the divide. Critics argued the players had reaped the rewards and faced no consequences. Defenders countered that the league needed their cooperation to prove the case. And as months turned into years, the court of public opinion rendered its own verdict. For many fans and opposing players, the 2017 Astros championship will always carry an asterisk. Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Carlos Correa has been booed relentlessly in opposing ballparks, their stats debated in light of the scandal, their legacies permanently complicated. And what's perhaps most striking is how the Astros responded. Competitively, they kept winning, returning to the World Series in 2019, 2021, and 2020 to winning that last one, proving that they didn't need the scheme to be elite, but also ensuring the cheating conversation would never fully die. The Astros sign-stealing scandal is a modern parable for baseball's struggle with technology. Where does competitive edge end and outright fraud begin? And how far is the far when the stakes are a championship ring? The legacy of this scandal won't be just about the 2017 title. It will be about the permanent mistrust it left behind, the suspicion that in an age of instant video and endless data, the next great scheme might already be brewing somewhere out of sight. Some scandals in baseball are born of greed or deception, but some tragedies reshape the game in ways no one could have predicted. And the death of Ray Chapman in 1920 remains one of the sport's most haunting turning points, not because of malice, but because it exposed how dangerous the game could be under the rules of the time. Chapman was a shortstop for the Cleveland Indians, beloved for his hustle and leadership, and on August 16, 1920, he stepped into the batter's box against the New York Yankees' Carl Mays, a pitcher with a submarine delivery and a reputation for pitching inside. It was the dead ball era, a time when pitchers routinely scuffed, spit on, and dirtied the ball to make it dance unpredictably. and games were often played with the same ball until it was nearly invisible against the dusk. On that day, one pitch from Mays sailed inside and struck Chapman in the head with a sickening crack. There were no batting helmets back then, and Chapman didn't even seem to react. Witnesses believed he never saw it coming. He collapsed on the field and was rushed to the hospital, but his skull fracture was too severe, and by the next day, he was gone, the only major league player ever to die from an on-field injury. His death was a shock to the entire sport, but it also forced immediate change. MLB banned the spitball and other ball-altering pitches, ordered fresh balls to be put in play regularly so hitters could see them clearly, and in doing so effectively ended the dead ball era, ushering in an age where offense flourished, where players like Babe Ruth could revolutionize the game with power hitting. Chapman's death also underscored something baseball had avoided acknowledging, that its traditions, however cherished, were not worth the lives of its players in the decades since. Other safety innovations, batting helmets, ear flaps, concussion protocols owe their existence to the lesson learned that day, yet for all the progress, Chapman's story is still a reminder that every pitch is a potential danger and that change in baseball, as in life, often only comes after something irreversible has happened. Few names in baseball history inspire as much debate, admiration, and frustration as Pete Rose, the man they called Charlie Hustle, a player whose career was the embodiment of grit, obsession, and an almost pathological refusal to lose. Rose was not just good, he was historic, collecting for 1,156 hits, the most in MLB history. Over a 24-year career, batting .303, winning 3 World Series rings, a World Series MVP in 1975, to Gold Gloves, and making 17 All-Star teams across 5 different positions. He was the beating heart of the Cincinnati Reds' Big Red Machine in the 1970s, the kind of player fans could believe would dive headfirst into third base in a meaningless game in May because winning wasn't just his job, it was his oxygen. But in 1989, that image fractured when reports surfaced that Rose, now managing the Reds, had been betting on baseball games, including those involving his own team. John Dowd's investigation for MLB concluded that Rose had bet on 50 Reds games in 1987. Though there was no evidence he bet against them, to Rose's fans, that distinction mattered. To MLB, it didn't. The league's rules on gambling are absolute, designed to protect the integrity of the game above all else. Rose denied the allegations but agreed to a deal, placing him on baseball's permanent ineligibility list, likely believing that he could negotiate his way back later. Then, in 1991, the Hall of Fame formalized a policy barring anyone on the ineligible list from induction, and suddenly, the greatest hitter the sport had ever seen was locked out of Cooperstown. Rose would spend decades campaigning for reinstatement, admitting into thousands for that he had, in fact, bet on games, but insisting he had never bet against his own team. He called out what he saw as hypocrisy of players who used performance-enhancing drugs or participated in cheating scandals kept their awards and eligibility, while his offense earned a lifetime exile. The debate raged on. Should a man whose on-field achievements are unparalleled be defined by what he did as a manager? Does the zero-tolerance rule on gambling protect the sport's soul, or punish it in ways that rob the Hall of Fame of its completeness? Rose died in September 2024, and just months later, MLB announced a change to the policy after death. Players on the ineligible list could be considered for reinstatement, meaning that in 2027, the Veterans Committee may finally vote on Rose's Hall of Fame case. The irony is almost poetic. A man who spent his whole life sprinting toward baseball immortality now waits, silently, for others to decide if the door will open after he's gone, and in that, Rose's story is both a cautionary tale about the absolute rules of the game and a tragedy about how even legends can end up on the outside looking in. By the mid-1980s, baseball's public image was already wrestling with the aftermath of free agency, labor disputes, and whispers of a changing culture in the clubhouse. But nothing prepared fans for the blunt force of the Pittsburgh drug trials in 1985. A scandal that didn't just name a few bad actors, it pulled back the curtain on a widespread, unglamorous truth. Cocaine had become a fixture in major league clubhouses. The case centered on a Pittsburgh Pirates mascot named Kevin Koken, a team clubhouse caterer named Curtis Strong, both accused of distributing drugs to players. And the trial's witness list read like an all-star roster gone wrong. 21 players in all were named, and 11 were suspended by MLB, though the punishments were quickly commuted in exchange for fines, community service, and drug testing. Among them were Dale Berra, son of Hall of Famer Yogi Berra, Jeffrey Leonard, an NLCS MVP, and Lonnie Smith, a three-time World Series champion. The testimony was jarring, players admitting to using cocaine before games, some during games, and in one particularly extreme case, pitcher Rod Scurry reportedly leaving a stadium mid-game to track down more drugs. Tim Raines, one of the era's most electrifying base stealers, admitted to sliding headfirst. He wouldn't break the vials of cocaine he kept in his back pocket. These weren't fringe players fighting for a roster spot. They were stars, and that made the revelation sting even more. MLB's commissioner at the time, Peter Ueberroth, responded with a blend of punishment and public relations repair, emphasizing rehabilitation over banishment, framing the league's approach as firm but compassionate and in fairness. Some of the players rebounded. Dave Parker went on to win another World Series in 1989. Keith Hernandez added more Gold Gloves and a 1986 World Series title with the Mets. But the trial also left an enduring mark. It punctured the illusion of the game as an untouched, almost pastoral escape from the vices that plagued other corners of society. It forced MLB to confront the reality that its players lived in the same world as their fans, with the same temptations, the same weaknesses, and the same capacity for self-destructs. Looking back now, the Pittsburgh drug trials feel like a grim precursor to later scandals, the Steroid era, sign stealing each. What a reminder that baseball's biggest problems often come from inside its own clubhouse, not from the opponents across the diamond. If the Pittsburgh drug trials revealed a culture problem in the clubhouse, the collusion cases of the 1980s exposed something just as corrosive in the boardroom. Team owners quietly working together to choke off player salaries and limit free agency, undermining the very system they had agreed to in the wake of baseball's first labor battles. The scheme ran from 1985 to 1987. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. On paper, the free agent market should have been alive. Stars like Carlton Fisk, Jack Morris, and Tim Raines were available, and in a competitive market, they should have been fielding multiple offers. But instead, a bizarre pattern emerged. Most of these players got no offers at all from other teams, or only one-year deals, forcing them to stay with their current clubs. In one glaring example, Yankees owner George Steinbrenner initially offered a contract to Fisk, only to rescind it after a phone call from White Sox chairman Jerry Reinsdorf. It was a wink and nod agreement across ownership to keep payrolls down, but to the players, it was wage fixing, pure and simple. The MLB Players Association filed its first grievance after the 1985 season, and the evidence piled up. By 1986, 75% of free agents were stuck signing one-year deals. Salaries for free agents dropped 16% even as league revenues rose 15%. When the second grievance hit after the 1986 offseason, the pattern was undeniable. Owners were even sharing contract information with one another, effectively blackballing players from negotiating fair market value. A third grievance followed, and in 1990, the owner settled, paying $180 million in damages to the players. It was a massive victory for the union on paper, but it left scars. Players no longer trusted owners to act in good faith, and that distrust would fester until it helped fuel the nuclear option of the 1994 strike. What's striking in hindsight is that, while the collusion era isn't as headline-grabbing as gambling scandals or drug trials, it cut to the core of baseball's economic structure. It showed that cheating the system doesn't always happen. Between the lines, it can happen in the quiet phone calls between men in suits, far from the sound of the crowd, and when that happens, the damage can be just as lasting as anything that happens on the field. Every era of baseball seems to have its superstar player whose talent feels like it bends the sport's limits, and in the 2020s, that player is Shohei Ohtani, a two-way phenomenon who can dominate as both a pitcher and a hitter, a modern Babe Ruth in an era of pitch counts, analytics, and global media. His image has been spotless, humble, hardworking, beloved not just in Los Angeles or Japan, but worldwide, which is why the events of March 2024 hit with the force of a fastball to the ribs. The story broke that Ohtani's longtime interpreter and close friend, Ipei Mizuhara, had stolen $16 million from Ohtani's accounts to pay off his own gambling debts. The details were murky from the start. Mizuhara initially claimed that Ohtani had willingly given him the money to help, only to walk that back almost immediately. The sudden reversal fueled speculation was Ohtani secretly gambling through Mizuhara, using him as a middleman. Was this a cover-up? The fact that it involved baseball's most marketable star made the questions feel even heavier. A federal investigation began, and every public appearance by Ohtani during those weeks carried an air of tension. His denials were clear. He had no knowledge of the theft until it came to light, and ultimately, prosecutors found no evidence of his involvement. Mizuhara pleaded guilty, was sentenced to nearly 5 years in prison, and ordered to pay back almost $17 million in restitution. The truth, as proven in court, was that Ohtani had been betrayed by someone he trusted implicitly. But the damage was done in another way. The scandal showed just how quickly even an untarnished reputation can be pulled into the mud by proximity. In an age where sports gambling is not just tolerated, but actively partnered with by leagues, even the appearance of impropriety can ripple out like a crack in the bat. Fans and media were reminded of how thin the line is between being a headline for your greatness and being a headline for your scandal. Ohtani's case resolved cleanly, but it leaves an uneasy question in its wake. What if the next time the superstar isn't so innocent? In a sport where gambling once banished shoeless Joe Jackson and Pete Rose, the fact that even whispers of it can cause chaos shows the shadow of those old rules is still long. Asterisk from the smoky backrooms of 1919 to the bright, high-definition replays of modern baseball. The game's greatest scandals share one unshakable truth. They're never just about the rule that was broken. They're about trust. In the 1994 strike, that trust was between fans and the people who were supposed to keep the game alive. In the Black Sox scandal, it was between teammates and the sanctity of competition. In the Steroid era, it was between players and the record books. The Astros sign-stealing shattered it between batter and pitcher. Ray Chapman's death proved it could even be broken by the sport's own negligence. Pete Rose's lifetime ban showed that breaking certain lines even without throwing a game can exile you forever. The Pittsburgh drug trials revealed that the heroes on the field could be as flawed and reckless as anyone else. Owner collusion proved that cheating can happen in suits and ties, not just in uniforms. And the Ohtani Mizuhara case reminded us that proximity to wrongdoing can be enough to cloud even the brightest star. Baseball sells itself as timeless, but these stories show it's anything but immune to the same forces: greed, ambition, arrogance, desperation that can corrupt any human endeavor. The lesson isn't that the game is broken. It's that the game, like the people who play and run it, is always in a fight to stay worthy of the trusted demands, and that fight doesn't end when the punishment is handed down. It continues every time a fan buys a ticket, every time a player steps to the plate, every time the league chooses whether to protect its image or tell the whole truth. Baseball scandals aren't just black marks in the history books. They're warnings carved into its very foundation that greatness is fragile, integrity is priceless, and that in this sport, more than almost any other, the fall from glory to disgrace can happen in the span of a single swing.